Okay, I'm going to get started, and then if you have any questions, you can either unmute yourself or you can drop them into the chat. Welcome to the fall semester. Just going to keep admitting people. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So this is really, today is just kind of about class expectations, especially since we're online, and just kind of having a good understanding of what it is I hope that you'll be able to do this semester. So again, if you have any questions, you can drop them into the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask. Feel free to interrupt me. And then on the last slide, on slide 9, I'm going to ask some of you to participate and give me some ideas or your thoughts. So I kind of titled this presentation as Toward a Class Constitution because I really want to try to help you understand the legal meaning of that word and the social science meaning of that word as well. And I'm going to kind of compare that to what everyday folks think a constitution is. And as you'll see in the Law and Identity Reader, my co-editor, Helen Margaret Nasser, had this phrase, democracy is not a spectator sport. I'm hoping that through this course, you'll see why that's the case and how you can get involved beyond voting. So the first thing that's difficult for a law professor at any level, doesn't really matter which group I'm working with, is there's myths that everybody comes into a class with, things that they believe are true because people told them they were true. And they haven't really necessarily, or you haven't necessarily examined those assumptions. So I kind of always think about this. I can't remember exactly what my grandmother told me about ifs, ands, and maybes. I know she had some kind of saying there, but I can't remember what the point was. But I do remember all of the shoulds, the things that I should do. And a lot of this is basically, we all think about law or rules as shoulds, things we should do. And if you don't do them, there'll be consequences. Probably it might have been the same situation with your grandmother. But of course, we didn't have the same grandmother. So the shoulds are not the same shoulds, and the consequences are not the same consequences. And that's why ifs, ands, and maybes are so important. But they're going to be different for every single person who looks at any given situation. So the way I try to think about this with you is that you're one person, and you see the course and the course material through your experience and through your point of view. Then there's, of course, my point of view, but then I see all of your points of view. So things are never quite as simple as just me and you. There's always more people involved. And so that brings me back to reality. And we'll get into this pretty deeply in a second. But out of the 2 courses that are constitutional law courses that I'm teaching this semester, only 18 out of the 58 students have actually engaged in the discussion board at all. And we're now approaching the 5th day of the semester. So 35 students, well over half, have not engaged actively with any portion of Blackboard. And only 19, so just one more than the discussion board, have completed the first assignment, and even fewer have completed the syllabus review. So I want you just to think about that for a second when we think about course rules, in opposition to what is the constitution of our class, of the people who are actually taking it. So this is always kind of a teaching moment for me and hopefully for you. If you just look at the numbers here, I just did what's called a word frequency analysis and just looked at the responses I got so far. The overwhelming majority of you use this word on time or turn things in on time. So punctuality is obviously something that is an important value to the 18 people who participated. Similar to that value is doing all assignments. I'm going to say this right here. is that if you took POL 51 or if you took a government class in high school, this is traditionally called the free rider problem, meaning that you 18 have started to do the work, but the other 40 are going to benefit from the work you've already done, but they didn't necessarily do the work. And so this is always kind of a challenge of participation in democracy. And so you'll see people oftentimes, especially when we're in person, people say, yeah, it's their fault, right? So the 40 are to blame, or they're not putting in the effort, or you've kind of got all these sayings that people have. But, and that may be true. I mean, some people are lazy, some people aren't, right? It's really hard to know the difference sometimes. But in reality, if you look at the different descriptions, though, that you gave besides doing work on time, so besides punctuality, there's a lot of differentiation, or you have different values than just that. So asking for help, planning ahead, talking to your professor, following instruction, participating, and respect, those are not really the same thing as doing your work on time. And so there's already, let's call it difference or variation within the values. So we want to kind of think about that for a second, because you all did the work on time. So you're biased towards doing work on time, which is fine, right? But it's just important to understand that that's a very small number of the total group, which again is pretty common in any democratic system. So it's way more complicated, because if I start to think about the systemic reasons that students haven't been able to participate so far, is they may have trouble with Blackboard. And there's a variety of troubles that you can have with Blackboard, especially in the first couple weeks. The next thing is, if you're new to online learning, then this whole thing can be very unusual for you. So I'll address what Fahad said in the chat. There isn't a reasonable way, in my opinion, to give a due date online. It would be like telling you that you can't post a TikTok video on Saturday. But of course you can. There's nothing stopping you from doing anything online at any hour of the day, any day of the week, right? That's kind of the whole point of internet, right? Is we're not limited to the physical rules of reality. So things are always open online. So, and Blackboard allows me to track a lot of information, so I can see when students log in. A lot of students log in when I am asleep, which probably tells you something about age. But it's the due dates then have to be flexible. They have to be something that you can all kind of work around your own schedule, especially if you have 4 or 5 classes and you're working. So my point here is that if you go back to that rule, 9 of you think that all of the work should be done on time, but that's not my rule. That's your rule. And I don't need the work to be done on time, because I'm not sure what on time means in the online world. And again, if you're new to online learning, then that can be really, really frustrating and different, because when we're in physical reality, things have to be on time because we're only there, right, 3 days a week for 1 hour. Whereas online, we're always here. So it's just kind of a new system that students have to get used to. And you obviously have already made good progress towards that, those of you who have done the discussion board. But I'm going to be patient with the others, right, because it's going to be a process for them. There's also registration advising confusion. And if you want to bring this up at the end, that'd be fine to let me know. A lot of students they tell me that they weren't sure what class they were even being put into. And so that takes 2 or 3 weeks just to get used to. What are my classes? What's the point of these? And how do they kind of fit into the whole system? There's also techno frustrations. I personally don't like Blackboard, but it's the thing that we're supposed to use at Kingsborough. So I use it, but I provide a lot of other options if you're having trouble with the technology. Time management is always an issue. You learn time management through college. That's one of the skills that you'll learn as you go, but you don't come into college usually as being a really great time manager unless unless you've managed other people's time in the workplace. And then we're all going to have life challenges. I'm going to say this like 4 or 5 times this semester. And a lot of those, if you understand what I'm saying here, are other people's problems that become our problems. And so you can't really plan ahead for that in a semester because you don't know what is going to happen to other people. So I want to make sure everybody has that kind of built-in flexibility that you can always make work up if you need to for almost all of the assignments. Now, the things that you all wanted me to do, I do agree with you. However, you should think about this. A lot of professors would look at these things and say, these are nice things, but this is not what I'm paid to do. And I want you to think about that pretty deeply in a way, because our identities have been constituted here as student and professor. And so you have your own beliefs and values about what a student is and what a professor is, but then the system has sometimes very different expectations of what a professor and a student is. And so this is really the kind of situation I want us to start thinking about in this class. And this is the learning moment here in this presentation, is that these are the definitions that you need to start being really familiar with in this course. A structure or a system. So in this case, Kingsborough Community College is the system, and the structure are the relationships within Kingsborough Community College. So there's department chairs, there's other professors, there's staff, there's the provost, there's the president, there's all these different players within this game of Kingsborough that all have different identities because they have different names before their names. So I'm Professor Jason Leggett, there's Provost Joanne Russell, there's President Claudia Schrader, right? So those titles are what constitute part of our identity. A constitution then only reflects the identities that constructed that document. So in the case of the United States Constitution, it was largely written by slaveholders, farmers, and lawyers. And so it represents those interests. Obviously I'm a lawyer, but I'm not a slaveholder or a farmer. I really don't know much about either of those economic positions. You may not know anything about all 3 of those things. And so the United States Constitution really doesn't reflect the values of our identities. It wasn't written by professors. It wasn't written by students. And this is one of those things you need to think about, because there are thousands, hundreds of thousands, and millions of constitutions all over the world. And these all have different constituted subjects. So they have different relationships. If any of you have spent time in other countries, you probably know this pretty deeply. Depending on where you are, you'll be treated differently. You'll see yourself differently. And this is generally just called implicit bias in social science. So, bias is not necessarily a bad thing. It can be a bad thing if it turns into discrimination or prejudice. But we are all biased based on our experiences and our values. And that's what you need to think about when you think the difference between constituted and constitution. Now, what's interesting is that to me, the ideals that you identified really reflect the early framing concept of the Puritan work ethic. And there's research that shows that this is because this is what you were taught in the educational system. Be on time, do your work hard. But these values are themselves unique to a particular culture at a particular time. That doesn't really make a lot of sense right now in this time that we're in. It's not that it's a problem, right? I mean, you can have this value, it's good for you, but it's not common to all cultures and families. Doing good work can be more important than doing a lot of work, depending on what culture or family you're in. Doing work together can be more important than doing work alone to other cultures and families. Spending time together can be more important than working. And so, these are the kind of value conflicts you need to think about. The other side of this is interesting, is these ideas of help, support, encourage, and respect. These are social responsibility values, which again, are not common to all cultures and families. In fact, those are not common to the Puritan work ethic. And so you see this kind of contradiction already. The more groups you have trying to make sense of a constitution, the more different meanings you're going to have. That's really a fundamental idea you need to carry through the entire semester. So the main idea here is that because our identities are socially constructed, meaning they're formed in relationship to other human beings, our ideas can't be for everyone. There's not going to be one rule that's going to apply to everyone. And another grandmother of mine would say, what you don't know could fill a book. And she was right? And that's why I like to write and write books, is there's so much information and new knowledge that you can get that you shouldn't think that you know everything. And you should really start to question your assumptions about things that you've been taught up to this point, because this is a legal class. You're now getting into the deep end of legal issues. So this class will challenge your assumptions, and that's kind of the point. So the first assumption is you have to understand, I enjoy the fact that students overwhelmingly, the huge majority of students think about rights. I understand why. I think that's a good idea for most of you. But that's not what the Constitution is about. If you look at the Constitution carefully, there's only 2 rights in the entire Constitution. You're thinking about the Bill of Rights and the amendments to the Constitution. But that's not, the Constitution is what structures the identities and what structures the game, if you want to think about it that way. The rights are the resistance, and that's what constitutional law is. It's a resistance to the game and the Constitution. And so rights and the Constitution do not go together. They're in polar opposition to each other. There's a tension between the 2 things. So this then kind of leads me to this question for you all, which is, now that you know some of these things, where do we go from here? I've offered 3 general areas for you to explore these topics. So one is civic engagement and the Student Union and Intercultural Center. And we want to think about how this encourages classmates to get involved and participate in the way that Director Helen Margaret Nasser had suggested. The other is that we need to think about content as ideas plus action. You live in a constitutional democratic republic, so just learning about it isn't enough. The whole system is built on your participation. So we have to think about, how do these ideas lead to action? And then I provide a variety of assignments so that you can show me you have different ways of knowing. Some of you will do better on one than the other, and that's okay. That's good. That's encouraged. But at this point, I would like to hear from you, either in the chat or if you want to unmute. And what other ideas would you have about, what's going on in the class? What more can we do? And just kind of some reactions to what you heard today, if there are any brave souls out there.